One aspect of biodesign that sometimes seems more like an art than a science is writing the specification, the need specification. So we'd like to spend a little bit of time looking at this and discussing the framework for what a useful and functional specification actually looks like. Specification document is not a design specification. There's a lot of confusion about that. The components of the specification document would be having a need statement, and we've talked about this before, and also the need analysis. We just went through that in an earlier segment in which we had to understand the clinical background, the disease state fundamentals, and again the existing treatments, and then do a market evaluation. Then emerged some criteria, versus a need to have versus a nice to have. So some of the features of the system, we start to have to differentiate between, again, this idea of need to have versus nice to have. So that all of these together really form the specification document. And what we're going to do to make this a little bit clearer, because sometimes it's vague at this point, is to start working through some examples. And I think sometimes working by examples is easier than just starting with theory and hoping people can converge on what to do with that theory. So let's go back from our observations from the period, whether we were in the OR or just shadowing or whatever we were doing. From our observations, we sort of identified a need or a problem to be addressed. So let's just take where somebody's been in the OR, cardiovascular situation where they need a better way to replace an aortic valve that reduces this paravalvular leak. So you put in the valve, and then there's this circumferential leak. The other things that would be sort of play into this are the elimination of the instability of the valve during deployment. You want to be able to reposition after the valve is deployed. You want to use existing biomaterials. Obviously, this expedites the process of approval. And you really want to just eliminate any possibility of coronary complications. And so in this case, a better way to place an aortic valve that reduces paravalvular leak. This actually has a little bit of a vague. This isn't actually the best way to describe this. We need to isolate the need or the problem to be addressed. So we're going to come back to that example in a bit. But some of the things to think about are that the need or the problem to be addressed. We have to be able to solve this within a practical time frame. Okay. It's nice to include existing and maybe cutting-edge technology, but it's got to be believable and demonstrated. The technology readiness level has to be there for a commercialization. And this statement is sometimes a little controversial, but has a reasonable market opportunity. This would, you can't exclude charitable situations. Most people think of market opportunity as something that's a large dollar. Market opportunity can actually take different forms. But regardless of whether it's profit, nonprofit, charitable, or non-charitable, you have to have a reasonable business model, or the adoption is just not going to be sustainable over the long haul. And so I think there's something else here that's very important. You have to have a demonstrable outcome for the need or the problem in the way that you specify the need statement. So the three suggestions we often share with people is that when you write the need statement, what you want to do is you want to focus on a goal, not a problem. You do not want to embed solutions into the need statement because that will unnecessarily restrict the scope of potential solutions. And you need to get specific. Vague statements have a way of rendering a need statement unactionable or not as effective as it could be. So let's talk a little bit about avoiding solutions, and let's just talk about the idea of you do some sort of thoracic operation. So a way to close the sternotomy without the risk of sternal wire breaking. And so the idea is that when you when you would crack open the sternum, there's this idea that the conventional approach is to take a wire and then and sort of suture the sternum back together again. So when we look at the need statement that says a way to close sternotomy without risk of sternal wire breaking, this narrows the solution to include a wire in the solution. It precludes other opportunities. So if we reworded this to say a way to close sternotomy quickly and securely, there's no reference to the current solution, and it really targets the procedural goal. And just take a look at this and think about this. And again, if you read the sections in the book on this matter, I think it starts to become fairly clear. But again, avoid solutions. When solutions are embedded in the need statement, you end up unnecessarily restricting the scope of potential solutions, thereby compromising the need statement. Focus on a goal, not a problem, and let's go through an example for that. A way to ultrasonically weld sutures in surgery. This completely limits the need statement to basically ultrasonic welding, and that very, very, very restrictive. And if we take a different example, going back to our earlier thought about the aortic valve, a way to secure aortic valve prosthesis with minimal or no on-part. So in other words, you don't want to have a heart-lung machine. So what happens in this case is, yes, you've identified a specific procedure and you've identified a specific problem, but you've left solutions open. You haven't specified exactly how you're going to secure. But it does provide enough boundary conditions to limit the approach. So basically what you're saying is you want minimal or no on pump. Basically you want to do this without a heart-lung machine. So that actually sets some parameters that are realistic to work with. Another thing I mentioned earlier was get specific. All right. So if we say something like a way to improve the outcome of cardiac surgery, this is really wide open. Okay. And what's absent here is any initial diagnosis or really how to improve outcomes. There's no sort of measurability of improvement. So so let's take a different example and say, how about a way to reduce risk of reherniation after lumbar disectomy for this cicada? So it's a very clear statement, and it's precise about the diagnosis and complications. So this is a case where you probably have to work through this a little bit, but again, I think we see that the very first need statement is extraordinarily broad, and again, too open, and no way to figure out how to improve the outcomes. And this, the second one actually is just a little bit more specific. And of course, in all of these, you may have to iterate, but I think you can see clearly the difference between the first and the second, that the second is actually more actionable than the first.